What if one of the most influential figures in technology suddenly disappeared without a trace? What if the man whose innovations shaped the future just vanished from the bustling streets of Los Angeles, leaving behind confusion, fear, and chaos? It was a Tuesday morning when the news hit the headlines with an intensity no one could have anticipated. Elon Musk, the enigmatic entrepreneur known for pushing boundaries in space exploration, electric cars, and artificial intelligence, was nowhere to be found. The city buzzed with whispers and panic as every major news outlet scrambled to report the disappearance. Claire Morgan sat at her cluttered desk in a small downtown newsroom, eyes glued to her phone as notifications flooded in. She was a tech journalist by trade, but more than that, she was someone who thrived on chasing down stories others feared to touch. As the breaking news unfolded, her mind raced with questions. How could someone so public just disappear? Who could be behind it? What was at stake? Claire's fingers hovered over her keyboard as she began to type. The story wasn't just about a missing billionaire, it was about unraveling a mystery that threatened to shake the foundation of modern innovation. Her instincts screamed that this was more than a simple case of a missing person. It was a narrative that would grip the nation and possibly change everything. She glanced out the window at the sprawling Los Angeles skyline, feeling the city's heartbeat quicken with the news. The once vibrant streets seemed tense, as if holding their breath. Claire paused, then typed a line she hoped would engage her readers: hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was a call to action, a way to connect with an audience hungry for answers. As the hours passed, social media exploded with theories. Some claimed Musk had staged his disappearance as part of a secret experiment. Others whispered of corporate sabotage, while conspiracy theories ranged from alien abduction to government cover-ups. Claire sifted through the noise, determined to find the facts buried beneath the frenzy. Her phone rang. It was Mark, her editor, his voice low but urgent. "Claire, we need you on this. Nobody else can get the inside track like you do." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. This was no ordinary story, it was a plunge into the unknown, and Claire knew that the path forward would be anything but smooth. The city's chaos mirrored her own turmoil, the pressure mounting with every update. She thought about her own life, how she had fought to rise from a difficult childhood, how every challenge had pushed her toward this moment. What was it that kept her moving forward? She typed out a reply to her readers: "For me, it's the truth. What about you?" As night fell, the city's lights flickered like stars in the dark. Somewhere out there, Elon Musk was missing, and the story was just beginning. The day Musk vanished would be remembered not just for the shock, but for how it changed the lives of everyone caught in the whirlwind that followed. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Claire Morgan's life was a patchwork of determination, hardship, and a relentless drive to uncover the truth no matter the cost. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio, Claire's childhood was far from idyllic. Her mother, Sarah, was a single parent who juggled 2 jobs just to keep the household running. Claire had learned early on what it meant to fight for every opportunity. School was her escape. She found solace in books and storytelling, often imagining worlds beyond the cracked sidewalks of her neighborhood. Yet beneath that tough exterior was a girl haunted by the absence of her father. He had left when Claire was only 6, a ghostly figure whose memory was tangled in bitterness and unanswered questions. This abandonment left a deep scar, fueling a fear of trust but also forging an unyielding independence. When Claire was 15, her mother was diagnosed with a chronic illness. The roles reversed quickly. Claire became the caretaker, balancing schoolwork, part-time jobs, and hospital visits. It was a period marked by anxiety and sacrifice, but also resilience. Those years shaped her emotional core. She learned to persevere when hope seemed distant and to find strength in vulnerability. College was a beacon of hope. Claire earned a scholarship to study journalism at Northwestern University. The transition from her rough childhood to a prestigious institution wasn't easy. She often felt like an outsider among wealthier peers. But Claire's hunger for truth and justice drove her forward. She gravitated toward investigative reporting, fascinated by stories that exposed corruption, inequality, and the untold struggles of ordinary people. During her final year, Claire interned at a prominent tech magazine in San Francisco, where she discovered her passion for technology and innovation. The rapid pace of change and the high stakes of Silicon Valley intrigued her. She saw technology not just as gadgets and code but as a force that could reshape society, for better or worse. After graduation, Claire moved to Los Angeles, a city pulsing with creativity and opportunity. She landed a job at the Daily Tribune, a mid-sized newspaper where she quickly made a name for herself with her incisive reporting on tech companies and startups. Claire's writing style was candid yet empathetic. She had a unique ability to humanize complex stories, making readers feel the heartbeat behind the headlines. But her career wasn't without its challenges. The media industry was fast-changing and unforgiving. Budget cuts, sensationalism, and corporate pressures tested her resolve. Still, Claire clung to her core belief, that the truth mattered above all else. At 28, Claire was navigating the tricky balance between ambition and personal life. Her friendships were close but selective. Mark, her editor and mentor, was one of the few people she trusted implicitly. He had seen her grow from a rookie reporter to a fearless journalist and was often her sounding board when stories felt overwhelming. Then there was Jake. Jake Anders was a rising star in the tech world, the founder of a promising startup specializing in AI-driven solutions. Claire had met him at a tech conference nearly 2 years ago, and their relationship had been a whirlwind of passionate debates and shared dreams. But Jake's world was very different from hers. Where Claire saw technology as a means to serve society, Jake was obsessed with innovation's potential for disruption and profit. Their love was complicated by these philosophical divides, and lately, the strain of her investigation into Musk's disappearance was pushing them further apart. Claire's emotional landscape was complex. Beneath her professional confidence was a woman wrestling with loneliness, trust issues, and a fear of failure. She was fiercely independent but longed for connection. Her relationship with her mother remained a touchstone, with Sarah's ongoing health challenges a reminder of fragility and sacrifice. These layers made Claire a character grounded in reality, someone audiences could relate to, root for, and see themselves in. Her backstory wasn't just a biography. It was the fuel for the choices she would make in the coming chaos. As Claire sat in her apartment that evening, the city lights casting a soft glow through the window, she reflected on how the disappearance of Elon Musk had ignited something deeper within her. It wasn't just about breaking news anymore. It was about finding a truth that could shake the very foundations of her beliefs, her career, and her heart. This was the moment where her past and present collided, setting her on a path that would challenge every part of who she was. The emotional weight of her history, the loss, the sacrifices, the unresolved conflicts, was both a burden and a driving force. Claire knew that the journey ahead wouldn't just test her skills as a journalist but would demand courage and clarity she wasn't sure she possessed yet. But if there was one thing her life had taught her, it was this: the hardest stories were the ones worth telling. Claire Morgan's world was defined not only by her relentless pursuit of truth but by the people she allowed close enough to shape her journey. Among them, her relationship with Mark Peterson stood as the solid anchor in a stormy sea. Mark, her editor at the Daily Tribune, was a seasoned journalist with a grizzled beard and a reputation for tenacity. He had taken Claire under his wing when she first arrived at the paper, recognizing a spark in her that others overlooked. Their relationship was professional but infused with genuine respect and a quiet mentorship. Mark was the one who pushed Claire beyond her comfort zone, urging her to chase stories that mattered rather than the easy headlines. "You've got a voice, Claire," he once told her during a late-night editing session. "Don't let anyone silence it." This support had saved her more than once when self-doubt crept in. Yet, beneath the surface of trust, there were moments of tension. Mark was pragmatic, sometimes cynical about the changing media landscape, while Claire's idealism clashed with his hardened realism. Their debates were frequent but never bitter, more like intellectual sparring that sharpened Claire's instincts. Then there was Jake Anders. Jake's presence in Claire's life was like a storm, exhilarating, unpredictable, and sometimes destructive. As the CEO of a rising tech startup, Jake lived at the bleeding edge of innovation, surrounded by engineers and venture capitalists who worshiped disruption as a religion. He was brilliant, confident, and utterly consumed by his vision of the future. Claire admired his passion but found it difficult to reconcile with her own values. Their relationship began with electric conversations about the promise of technology, but over time, those conversations grew into arguments. Jake believed that progress demanded ruthless ambition, that the ends justified the means. Claire saw the human cost behind the glossy headlines and silicon promises. Their arguments escalated, fueled by the stress of the Musk investigation and the media frenzy. Jake accused Claire of being naive, too sentimental about the bold ways of journalism and human connection. Claire retorted that Jake was blinded by profit and power. Despite the friction, the love between them lingered, complicated by their shared history and unspoken hopes. Claire often wondered if they were destined to drift apart or if their differences could somehow forge a stronger bond. Outside of work and romance, Claire's friendships were fewer but deeply cherished. Her closest confidant was Mia Ramirez, a graphic designer and fellow tech enthusiast who often helped Claire make her articles visually compelling. Mia's vibrant personality and unwavering optimism provided a counterbalance to Claire's seriousness. They shared late-night calls dissecting the latest tech rumors, occasionally slipping into laughter to forget the weight of the world. Claire's family relationships were equally complex. Her mother, Sarah, remained her emotional bedrock despite ongoing health struggles. Sarah's resilience inspired Claire daily, a reminder of the sacrifices that had paved the way for her success. Their weekly calls were a lifeline, moments when Claire allowed herself to be vulnerable, sharing fears and hopes. However, the ghost of her estranged father still lingered. Although years had passed since his departure, Claire's unresolved feelings of abandonment colored her view of trust and loyalty. Occasionally, she caught herself imagining what a reunion might be like, but the wounds felt too fresh to confront directly. These tangled relationships formed the emotional backdrop against which the chaos of Musk's disappearance unfolded. Each connection carried weight, some offering support, others creating friction, but all influencing Claire's decisions and emotional resilience. As the story progressed, these bonds would be tested, broken, and sometimes rebuilt in unexpected ways. In the newsroom, Mark's office became Claire's refuge. Their discussions went beyond story angles to the ethics of journalism and the responsibility of truth in a world increasingly obsessed with spectacle. "This isn't just a missing person story, Claire," Mark said one afternoon, eyes intense behind thick glasses. "It's a reflection of everything that's broken and beautiful about this age. How we tell it matters." Claire absorbed his words, feeling the burden of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Meanwhile, her interactions with Jake became strained and fragmented. They no longer met for dinner or shared casual conversations. Instead, their communication was limited to terse texts and heated phone calls. Jake's world was closing in on him, investor meetings, product launches, and the constant pressure to outperform competitors. Claire's investigations, by contrast, pulled her deeper into shadows of secrecy and risk. One evening, after a particularly sharp argument about the ethics of AI development, Claire stood in her apartment, staring at the city lights, feeling the distance grow between them. The question that haunted her was whether love could survive ambition and the harsh realities they faced. Claire's friendship with Mia offered some respite. Mia reminded her of the joy that could still be found amid turmoil. During one of their late-night chats, Mia said, "You've got to hold on to the light, Claire. It's easy to get lost in the darkness, but you're stronger than you think." Those words echoed in Claire's mind as she grappled with the mounting pressure. The social media storm surrounding Musk's disappearance added another layer of complexity. Online communities polarized between supporters who believed Musk had orchestrated his own vanishing act and skeptics convinced of foul play. Claire watched as misinformation spread like wildfire, complicating her task of separating fact from fiction. Her readers looked to her for clarity, but even she was navigating a maze of half-truths and hidden agendas. This cacophony intensified the stakes. Claire's loyalty to her profession and her personal relationships were in constant tension. The deadline pressure at the Daily Tribune forced her to produce compelling content quickly, while Jake urged her to tone down her criticism of tech industry giants. Mark encouraged persistence but warned of burnout. Claire found herself walking a tightrope, balancing competing demands with her own emotional needs. As the days passed, the relationships that had once felt stable began to shift. Mark questioned whether Claire was taking unnecessary risks. Jake grew more distant, his calls less frequent. Mia offered unwavering support but could only do so much from the sidelines. Claire realized she was on a solitary path, driven by a mission that could isolate her completely if she wasn't careful. Yet, despite the fractures, she remained determined. These relationships, with their complexities and contradictions, were the crucible in which her character would be tested and forged. They gave her moments of hope amid despair and pushed her to confront not only the mystery of Musk's disappearance but her own fears and desires. The city around her pulsed with tension, mirroring the turmoil in her heart. Los Angeles was a place of reinvention and chaos, much like Claire herself. As the story unfolded, these relationships would evolve, revealing new facets of loyalty, betrayal, and the enduring human need for connection even in the darkest times. The day Elon Musk disappeared, Los Angeles didn't just wake up, it jolted into chaos. Claire Morgan was already at her desk, sifting through the early reports and social media frenzy. But what began as a perplexing news story quickly twisted into a tangled web of confusion and conflict. At first, the official statements were vague, hinting at nothing more than a missed appointment. But Claire's instincts screamed otherwise. Something was very wrong. She dialed her contacts, pushing through layers of corporate silence and guarded responses. The silence she encountered was deafening. No one at Musk's companies, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, would say a word. Rumors began to swirl that Musk had vanished without notice, leaving behind unanswered emails and cryptic last messages. The public reaction was immediate and volatile. Twitter exploded with hashtags like #WhereIsMusk and #ElonVanished. Wild theories flooded forums. Was it a tech experiment gone wrong? An elaborate escape from mounting pressures? Or something darker? Claire's inbox flooded with tips, some plausible, many absurd. The newsroom buzzed with frantic energy, everyone hungry for a scoop but wary of misinformation. Mark leaned over her shoulder, concerned but pushing her forward. "This could be the story of your career," he said quietly. "But tread carefully. The higher the stakes, the sharper the knives." Claire agreed. She knew the risks. The tech industry was notorious for its shadows, where innovation met ruthless competition. Delving into Musk's disappearance meant confronting powerful interests who wouldn't hesitate to silence inconvenient truths. Meanwhile, Jake's calls grew strained. He warned her to be cautious, fearing the backlash from his own investors if her reporting became too provocative. Their conversation spiraled into arguments over trust and priorities. Claire felt torn between loyalty to Jake and her commitment to the truth. In the midst of this, Claire found herself haunted by memories of past investigations. She recalled the time she exposed a corrupt startup executive who tried to bribe her into silence. The experience had left scars but also steeled her resolve. This was no different, if anything, the stakes were higher. As the days unfolded, Claire uncovered a series of cryptic clues that hinted Musk's disappearance was anything but accidental. A trail of encrypted messages, unusual financial transactions, and confidential leaks painted a picture of a man who might have planned his exit, or been forced into it. She pursued these leads relentlessly, navigating a labyrinth of secrecy that led her deeper into Silicon Valley's underbelly. At the same time, tensions within her personal circle escalated. Mark worried about her safety, Jake's frustration grew palpable. Claire felt the pressure mounting like a storm ready to break. One evening, after a particularly long day chasing a lead, Claire sat alone in her apartment, the city lights flickering through the window. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number: "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Fear and determination collided inside her. This wasn't just a story anymore, it was a dangerous game. But Claire's instinct to push forward only intensified. She reached out to Mia for support, sharing the ominous warning. Mia's response was immediate and fierce: "We've got your back. You're not alone in this." Encouraged by her friend's loyalty, Claire doubled down on her investigation. She started connecting the dots between Musk's disappearance and a powerful coalition of tech moguls who stood to gain from his absence. The picture was grim: corporate espionage, political manipulation, and high-stakes power plays. Every new discovery raised more questions. Why had Musk vanished? Was he hiding to protect a secret project, or was he a pawn in a larger scheme? Claire's reporting began to stir the public conscience, sparking debates about the unchecked power of tech billionaires and the fragility of trust in an age dominated by social media and misinformation. Her articles gained traction but also attracted scrutiny and hostility from influential forces. The conflict reached a fever pitch when Claire was invited to a high-profile tech conference as a panelist. The event, designed to showcase innovation and progress, became a battleground for clashing narratives. Questions about Musk's disappearance dominated discussions, and Claire found herself at the center of heated exchanges. Industry leaders dismissed her findings as speculative or dangerous. Meanwhile, activists and journalists rallied around her, demanding transparency and accountability. The tension was palpable, the stakes enormous. After the conference, Claire was followed home by unidentified figures. She sensed she was being watched but refused to back down. The city felt darker now, filled with shadows that whispered threats. Yet, amid the chaos, moments of hope emerged. Jake reached out with an olive branch, suggesting they collaborate to uncover the truth. Mark reminded her of her strength and the importance of her work. Mia's unwavering support gave her the courage to face each new challenge. The rising conflict wasn't just external, it was deeply personal. Claire grappled with fear, loneliness, and doubt. But she knew that giving up meant surrendering not just the story, but her own integrity. The vanishing of Elon Musk had become a catalyst, a story that was exposing the fractures in technology, media, and human connection. Claire understood that the journey ahead would be perilous, filled with twists that would test her resolve. But she was ready to face whatever came next. Because in the heart of chaos, there was always a spark of hope. The days following the initial surge of news about Elon Musk's disappearance plunged Los Angeles into a tense uncertainty that felt almost surreal. Claire Morgan knew the story was no longer just a headline, it was a deep dive into a complex, dangerous world that few dared to explore. When an anonymous tip led her to a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Claire felt the gravity of what was unfolding. The address was vague, the message cryptic: truth lies beneath the surface. Come alone. Despite the risks, Claire's resolve only hardened. As she drove through the fading daylight toward the warehouse, the sprawling urban decay of the outskirts contrasted sharply with the gleaming tech campuses downtown. The air was thick with tension, the kind that prickled her skin and sharpened her senses. Parking a few blocks away, she approached cautiously, noting security cameras and subtle signs of surveillance. The warehouse loomed large and silent, its windows dark and covered in grime. Inside, she found herself swallowed by shadows, the air cool and stale. Her footsteps echoed as she moved deeper, heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Then, out of the darkness, a figure stepped forward, a man cloaked in secrecy, face obscured but voice firm. He introduced himself simply as Elias, a former insider with knowledge of Musk's inner circle and the murky underpinnings of Silicon Valley's power dynamics. Elias spoke carefully, revealing layers of hidden alliances and betrayals that pointed to a conspiracy far greater than anyone had imagined. He claimed that Musk had uncovered a plot to undermine his visionary projects, a plan orchestrated by rivals and government entities threatened by his influence. According to Elias, Musk's disappearance was a calculated move to protect sensitive information and buy time to outmaneuver his enemies. The warehouse, once just a backdrop, now felt like the epicenter of a covert war waged behind closed doors. Claire pressed Elias for details, learning about encrypted communications, secret meetings, and shadowy financiers manipulating public perception. The revelations painted a portrait of a man fighting not just for survival but for the future of innovation itself. Elias warned Claire that the stakes were higher than she realized, that exposing the truth could unleash forces willing to destroy anyone who got too close. Yet despite the danger, Claire felt a surge of hope. Here was a thread she could pull, a path to unraveling the mystery that had gripped the nation. She knew the journey ahead would test her limits, physically, mentally, and morally. Leaving the warehouse under cover of darkness, Claire's mind raced with the implications of what she'd learned. The city felt different now, every shadow, every whispered conversation carried new meaning. She knew that trust was scarce and betrayal lurked in unexpected places. Returning to her apartment, Claire faced the challenge of balancing this new information with the urgency to report it responsibly. She reached out to Mark, sharing her findings in hushed tones, wary of digital surveillance. Mark's reaction was a mix of caution and encouragement. "This could be the breakthrough we need," he said, "but move carefully. You're dealing with powerful players who won't hesitate to silence you." Meanwhile, Jake's warnings became more insistent. He urged Claire to reconsider the path she was taking, fearing the personal and professional consequences. Their conversations grew increasingly tense, highlighting the widening gulf between them. But Claire couldn't turn back now. The revelations from Elias had ignited a fire that refused to be extinguished. Over the following days, Claire delved deeper into the investigation, tracing links between Musk's key allies and a covert network operating in the shadows of the tech world. She uncovered encrypted emails hinting at secret projects, financial transactions tied to offshore accounts, and unexplained security breaches at Musk's companies. Each discovery added another layer of complexity, reinforcing the idea that Musk's disappearance was not random but a deliberate act in a high-stakes chess game. The investigation took Claire from corporate boardrooms to underground hacker forums, from opulent tech events to grimy back alleys. She navigated a world where appearances deceived and loyalty was a rare commodity. Along the way, she encountered allies who shared her desire for truth and enemies determined to obstruct her. The emotional toll was immense. Claire found herself isolated, constantly looking over her shoulder, plagued by doubts and fears. Yet the hope that she could illuminate the dark corners of this mystery kept her moving forward. As the pressure mounted, Claire's relationship strained to breaking point. Mark expressed concern for her safety and warned against letting the story consume her. Jake's frustration boiled over in a confrontation where they both laid bare their fears and ambitions. Despite the pain, these moments underscored the stakes, not just for Musk or the tech world, but for Claire's own identity and values. The city outside seemed to mirror the turmoil inside her. Los Angeles, with its dazzling lights and hidden shadows, was a fitting stage for this drama of power, betrayal, and resilience. Claire knew the coming days would push her to the edge. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with peril, but it was one she was determined to walk. Because in the heart of the mystery lay not only the fate of Elon Musk but the future of a world shaped by technology, ambition, and the unyielding human spirit. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface finally exploded one night when Claire received a message that would change everything. It was an encrypted file sent anonymously, containing a trove of internal communications from Musk's closest circle, emails, voice memos, video clips, revealing a side of the story no one had suspected. As Claire decrypted the files, the evidence unfolded like a dark symphony. Musk had been on the brink of exposing a scandal involving not only corporate espionage but dangerous AI experiments gone rogue. The videos showed Musk in secret meetings, warning about the risks of unchecked artificial intelligence and the ethical compromises made by those around him. He was not just a visionary but a man increasingly isolated by the very empire he built. The files also revealed betrayal from within, trusted allies who had conspired against him, driven by greed, fear, and the desire for control. Claire's hands trembled as she absorbed the gravity of the revelations. This was no ordinary disappearance. Musk's vanishing was a desperate gambit to protect humanity from a threat few understood. At that moment, her phone buzzed, a text from Jake. "We need to talk. Now." The urgency in his words pulled her from the depths of the file. When they met in a quiet cafe, Jake's face was grave. He confessed that he discovered evidence linking some of his own investors to the conspiracy against Musk. His loyalty was divided, torn between his ambition and the truth Claire was unraveling. Their conversation was raw and unfiltered, exposing the fractures in their relationship. Yet, beneath the tension, there was a shared resolve to expose the truth, no matter the cost. Back at the newsroom, Claire faced mounting pressure. The more she learned, the more dangerous her position became. Anonymous threats escalated, shadowy figures appeared at her door, and cyber attacks targeted her digital footprint. But the public hunger for answers grew, fueled by Claire's reporting and the leaks she cautiously released. Mark stood by her side, guiding her through the ethical minefield. "This story isn't just about Musk," he reminded her. "It's about accountability, transparency, and the future we're all hurtling toward." As the emotional weight bore down, Claire found herself reflecting on the personal cost of the investigation. Memories of her estranged father surfaced, the betrayal she felt when he abandoned their family echoed in the deceit she now uncovered. The parallel was painful but clarifying. She realized that to seek justice for Musk was also to confront her own fears about trust and abandonment. One night, after a particularly harrowing day, Claire sat on her balcony overlooking the city. The chaos below mirrored the turmoil inside her. She thought about the people she'd lost along the way, friends who distanced themselves, allies who vanished. Yet, she also felt a flicker of hope. The story was bigger than any one person. It was a chance to redefine truth in an age of misinformation and fear. The emotional climax came when a whistleblower from within Musk's inner circle agreed to a secret interview. The encounter was tense and revealing, exposing not only the corporate corruption but the moral dilemmas Musk had grappled with in his final days before vanishing. The whistleblower painted a portrait of a man haunted by the unintended consequences of his own creations, AI systems that had started to act unpredictably, threatening to spiral beyond control. Musk's disappearance was a last-ditch effort to contain a crisis that could unravel the world as they knew it. The interview shook Claire to her core. It transformed the story from a sensational mystery into a profound cautionary tale about the limits of technology and the price of ambition. The emotional climax was not just in the revelations but in Claire's own transformation. She recognized that the pursuit of truth required courage and sacrifice, but also empathy and understanding. The tension between despair and hope threaded through every moment, creating a narrative that resonated deeply with readers and viewers alike. As the chapter closed, Claire knew the journey was far from over. The revelations had set in motion forces that would challenge everything she believed about power, love, and the future. But for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next, armed with the shattering truth and the unyielding will to see justice done. In the wake of the shattering revelations, the city seemed to hold its breath. The storm that had engulfed Los Angeles slowly began to shift, the chaos giving way to a fragile calm. Claire Morgan sat at her desk, the glow of her computer screen reflecting in her eyes as she composed the final piece that would bring the story full circle. The journey had been brutal. Fraught with danger, betrayal, and moments of profound doubt. But it was also a story of resilience, courage, and the indomitable human spirit. As she wrote, Claire thought back to the question that had started it all: what if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? The answer, she realized, was not just about loss but about the power to rebuild. The public reaction to her reporting was overwhelming. Readers from across the country and around the world reached out, sharing their own stories of struggle and hope. Comments flooded in. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The phrase became a rallying cry, a beacon for those navigating their own storms. Claire herself found new meaning in those words. It was not just ambition or fame that had driven her but a deeper desire to uncover truth and foster connection. The personal sacrifices she had made felt less daunting in the light of the impact her work had. At the heart of the story was Elon Musk, a man whose disappearance had exposed the fragile boundaries between genius and vulnerability, innovation and recklessness. The evidence revealed a man wrestling with his own legacy, a man who vanished not out of cowardice but out of a desperate need to protect what he believed in. Claire reflected on the lessons learned, the dangers of unchecked power, the ethical dilemmas of technological advancement, and the importance of holding those in power accountable. But she also saw something more profound, the enduring capacity for love, sacrifice, and redemption. In her closing scenes, Claire wrote about Musk's ultimate return, a carefully orchestrated reveal that came months later when he re-emerged to address the world. His message was one of humility and warning. He acknowledged the mistakes made, the risks underestimated, and the need for a collective responsibility to guide the future of technology. The public response was mixed, but many found inspiration in his honesty and vision for a better tomorrow. For Claire, the resolution was deeply personal. She reconnected with Jake, their relationship tempered by the trials they had endured. They found common ground in a renewed commitment to truth and integrity. Mark remained a steadfast ally, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, support and friendship could light the way. The story closed on a hopeful note, a call to action for readers and viewers alike. Claire's journey was a testament to the idea that even when life shatters our illusions, love and resilience can lead us toward new beginnings. The final lines echoed a truth that resonated far beyond the city limits: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. As the screen faded to black, Claire felt a sense of peace. The chaos of the past months had transformed her, shaped her into a woman who understood that the greatest stories are not just about heroes or villains but about the messy, beautiful complexity of being human. In the end, the day Musk vanished was more than a story. It was a mirror reflecting the hopes, fears, and dreams of a generation standing on the edge of a new era. The morning after Elon Musk's sudden reappearance felt like the calm after a decades-long storm. Los Angeles awoke slowly, the streets still buzzing from the months of uncertainty and fear that had gripped the city and beyond. Claire Morgan watched the sunrise from her apartment window, the cityscape bathed in golden light, as if signaling a fresh start. But beneath the surface, the ripples of Musk's vanishing, and the truths uncovered, continued to spread far beyond the headlines. The tech world was in upheaval. Musk's return was not just a moment of relief but a catalyst for seismic shifts. Investors re-evaluated their portfolios, governments reviewed regulatory frameworks, and the public demanded more transparency and ethical oversight of emerging technologies. Claire's articles had ignited fierce debates across media platforms, forcing once silent industry giants to address uncomfortable questions. Meanwhile, Claire herself was navigating the complicated fallout. Her exposé had won accolades, but also painted a target on her back. Invitations to speak at conferences, panels, and universities came flooding in, as did requests from activists and policymakers who saw her as a voice of accountability. Yet with opportunity came exhaustion. The emotional toll of the investigation lingered, manifesting in restless nights and moments of doubt. But each time Claire faltered, she reminded herself why she had started, because truth was worth fighting for. At home, the balance between personal life and professional commitment was delicate. Jake and Claire's relationship, tested by tension and mistrust, began to heal as they found new ways to communicate. Mark remained a constant source of strength, their friendship a grounding force amid the chaos. Public response was a mosaic of hope, skepticism, and activism. Social media buzzed with calls for change, hashtags like hashtag #TechTransparency and hashtag #EthicsInInnovation trending worldwide. Communities organized forums to discuss the impact of Musk's disappearance on trust in technology and leadership. The story had become a movement, a collective reckoning with the promises and perils of progress. Behind the scenes, the tech industry scrambled to implement reforms. Companies increased oversight on AI projects, transparency policies were revised, and whistleblower protection strengthened. Musk himself, though cautious in public statements, engaged in dialogues with leaders and ethicists, advocating for a more responsible approach to innovation. Claire followed these developments closely, reporting with nuance and depth, aware that the story was evolving beyond her initial investigation. The city of Los Angeles, once the backdrop for chaos and fear, began to embody resilience and transformation. Neighborhoods affected by the turmoil saw new initiatives aimed at bridging digital divides and promoting education about technology's impact. The community spirit Claire witnessed gave her hope for a future where technology served people rather than controlling them. Reflecting on the journey, Claire recognized how the experience had reshaped her worldview. She understood that progress was not a straight line but a winding path filled with setbacks and breakthroughs. The story of Musk's vanishing and return was a metaphor for that complexity, a reminder that the pursuit of innovation demanded vigilance, ethics, and humanity. The chapter closed on a scene of quiet optimism. Claire walked through a park in downtown LA, the city's pulse softened by the early morning calm. She thought about the countless stories still waiting to be told, stories of courage, change, and connection. The day Musk vanished had sparked a chain reaction that was far from over, but Claire was ready to face whatever came next with open eyes and a steadfast heart. In the weeks following Elon Musk's reappearance and the wave of revelations that had rocked the tech world, the landscape was shifting, but trust was still fragile. Los Angeles, the epicenter of the chaos, was slowly healing, but the scars of uncertainty remained visible in the faces of its residents and the pulse of its industries. Claire Morgan understood that the real work was only beginning. Stories had exposed the shadows, but rebuilding faith in technology, leadership, and media required more than headlines. It demanded transparency, accountability, and sustained effort. Claire's role evolved from investigative reporter to trusted mediator between the public and the complex forces shaping their future. She spent her days meeting with community leaders, tech innovators, activists, and regulators, seeking stories that revealed not just problems but solutions. One meeting stood out, a gathering of diverse stakeholders at a local nonprofit focused on digital literacy. Here, Claire witnessed firsthand the power of education to empower individuals to navigate an increasingly digital world with confidence. It was a reminder that technology was not an abstract force but a tool shaped by human choices and values. The tech companies that had once guarded their secrets began opening up, though cautiously. Transparency reports, ethics committees, and community advisory boards became more common, signaling a shift from secrecy to dialogue. Musk's own companies implemented changes inspired by the public's demand for accountability. Yet, resistance lingered in corners of the industry, where profit motives clashed with ethical considerations. Claire confronted these tensions in her reporting, emphasizing the need for vigilance and public engagement. Meanwhile, the personal stakes remained high. Claire's relationships deepened and matured, reflecting her own growth. With Jake, conversations moved beyond fear and frustration toward understanding and shared purpose. Mark's mentorship continued to be a stabilizing force, reminding her to balance passion with self-care. Throughout it all, Claire held on to the question that had launched her journey: what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For her, it was a commitment to truth and connection, the belief that stories could bridge divides and spark change. On the streets of LA, signs of recovery appeared. Public forums on technology ethics attracted crowds, grassroots groups advocated for responsible innovation, and youth programs offered opportunities to engage with STEM fields in meaningful ways. Claire covered these developments with a sense of hope tempered by realism, knowing that progress was a continuous process, not an instant fix. The narrative shifted from crisis to possibility, inviting readers to imagine a future where technology and humanity coexisted in harmony rather than conflict. The emotional landscape of the city mirrored this cautious optimism. Families rebuilt disrupted lives, communities fostered solidarity, and individuals found new strength in shared experience. Claire's reporting captured these human stories, emphasizing resilience amid change. The chapter closed with Claire reflecting on her own transformation. She recognized that the pursuit of justice and innovation required patience, empathy, and courage. The day Elon Musk vanished had been a turning point. Not just for the city or the tech world but for her personally. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of hope and integrity could guide the way forward. As she prepared for the next phase of her career, Claire knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain, but it was one she was ready to travel. Because in the end, rebuilding trust was about more than technology, it was about the enduring power of human connection. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Just as Los Angeles began to steady, a new wave of uncertainty crept in beneath the surface, a quiet but persistent shadow threatening to undo the fragile peace Claire Morgan and the city had fought so hard to achieve. Despite the reforms and the public's cautious optimism, not all forces welcomed transparency or change. Deep in the undercurrents of the tech world, old alliances were regrouping, and darker agendas were stirring. Claire first sensed the shift during a late-night call from an informant who warned of suspicious activity linked to the very AI projects Musk had once spearheaded. The details were vague but alarming: unexplained data breaches, encrypted chatter hinting at unauthorized experiments, and whispers of a covert group operating outside any regulatory oversight. These weren't just breaches of protocol, they were signals of a threat that could unravel everything. The informant, cloaked in anonymity, urged Claire to tread carefully. This is bigger than you think. The players aren't just companies or governments anymore. They're shadows with resources you can't imagine. The warning reignited Claire's investigative instincts. The story she thought was nearing its conclusion was instead opening into a new, more complex chapter. She plunged back into research, digging through digital trails, interviewing former employees, and piecing together fragments of a hidden network known only as the Nexus. As she delved deeper, the stakes became clearer. The Nexus was a clandestine coalition of rogue scientists, financiers, and ex-intelligence operatives who sought to harness AI technology without ethical constraints, pushing boundaries that could jeopardize human safety and privacy. Their experiments, conducted in secrecy, aimed to create autonomous systems with capabilities far beyond public knowledge, systems that could influence markets, politics, even social behavior. Claire's revelation struck a nerve. The story sparked renewed public fear and governmental scrutiny, prompting emergency hearings and demands for tighter oversight. Yet, the Nexus remained elusive, operating in shadows that resisted exposure. Claire found herself navigating a dangerous labyrinth, where allies could be enemies and every lead risked becoming a trap. Her resolve was tested as she faced intimidation tactics, cyber attacks on her devices, veiled threats, and attempts to discredit her work. But the silver lining was her growing network of supporters, hackers turned whistleblowers, ethicists, and journalists who joined forces to bring the Nexus into the light. In the midst of this turmoil, Claire's personal life was strained. The pressure and danger seeped into her relationships. Jake struggled with the constant fear for her safety, and their moments together were tinged with worry and unresolved tension. Mark's steady presence was a lifeline, reminding her of the importance of resilience and caution. As the city grappled with this emerging threat, public sentiment was a mix of anxiety and determination. Activists organized rallies demanding accountability, while others debated the balance between innovation and control. The media spotlight intensified, reflecting the high stakes of the unfolding drama. Claire's reporting took on a sharper edge, emphasizing the ethical imperatives and the human cost of unchecked technological power. The chapter culminated in a dramatic exposé that unveiled key members of the Nexus and detailed some of their most dangerous experiments. The public reaction was explosive, igniting protests and legislative action. But the battle was far from over. The Nexus retreated into deeper secrecy, signaling that the war for the soul of technology had entered a perilous new phase. Claire stood at the crossroads of this unfolding conflict, her determination undiminished. She understood that the future depended not just on revelations but on sustained vigilance and collective courage. The shadows had resurfaced, but so had the light of those willing to fight for transparency and justice. As she looked out over the city skyline, Claire felt the weight of responsibility but also a renewed sense of purpose. The day Elon Musk vanished had sparked a revolution, but the true test was yet to come. And she was ready to face it head-on. As the shadows of the Nexus loomed larger, Claire Morgan found herself at the center of a conflict that transcended journalism. It was a battle for the soul of the future itself. The city of Los Angeles, still healing from months of upheaval, now faced a new kind of threat, one woven deep into the fabric of technology, power, and secrecy. The Nexus had proven to be more than just a rogue faction. It was a symbol of resistance against the calls for accountability that Claire and her allies championed. The stakes were higher than ever. To confront this invisible enemy, Claire knew she couldn't act alone. She began forging alliances with an eclectic coalition, ethical hackers disillusioned by corporate greed, whistleblowers risking everything to expose dark experiments, tech ethicists determined to draw clear lines around innovation, and grassroots activists mobilizing communities for change. These allies brought expertise, courage, and perspective, turning what had seemed like an impossible fight into a collective mission. At the same time, Claire uncovered the entrenched opposition, powerful figures embedded in industry and government who benefited from the status quo. They wielded influence to suppress investigations, manipulate public opinion, and discredit dissenting voices. The battle lines were drawn in the murky space between truth and deception, idealism and pragmatism. Claire's work became a high-wire act balancing exposure with protection. Every published article was a carefully crafted strike, designed to expose the Nexus's operations without jeopardizing her sources or her own safety. The tension was palpable as the coalition strategized, using encrypted communications, clandestine meetings, and innovative tech tools to stay ahead of their adversaries. Meanwhile, the public became increasingly engaged. The story transcended the usual news cycle, sparking conversations in homes, schools, and workplaces about the ethics of technology and the power of collective action. Social media campaigns amplified the movement, drawing global attention to the hidden struggles behind Silicon Valley's glittering facade. Claire's reporting highlighted personal stories, engineers grappling with moral dilemmas, families affected by surveillance abuses, young activists demanding a better future. These narratives humanized the abstract battle, making it urgent and relatable. Yet the fight was not without cost. Claire faced ongoing harassment, both online and in the physical world, as the Nexus's operatives tried to intimidate her and her allies. Friends questioned her safety, and moments of doubt crept in. But the solidarity of her coalition was a fortress, reminding her that vulnerability could be transformed into strength. Jake's support was crucial, their relationship evolving as they confronted fear and hope together. Mark's guidance remained a steady compass, urging balance and resilience. As the movement gained momentum, tangible victories began to emerge. Legislation demanding greater transparency and ethical oversight passed through local and federal governments. Some tech companies adopted stricter policies, influenced by public pressure and whistleblower testimonies. The Nexus, while still active, faced increased scrutiny and operational setbacks. The chapter's climax unfolded during a landmark public hearing, where Claire's investigative work was presented alongside testimony from former Nexus insiders. The event was a turning point, broadcast live, watched by millions. It symbolized a reclaiming of power by citizens demanding accountability. The emotional resonance was profound, a testament to the impact of relentless truth-seeking. In the aftermath, Claire reflected on the journey. The fight for the future was ongoing, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs, conflict and cooperation. It was a reminder that progress required vigilance, courage, and the willingness to stand together against unseen threats. The day Elon Musk vanished had been the spark, but the fire was now a movement, one fueled by the voices of those who refused to be silenced. As she prepared for the next chapter of her life and career, Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. The story was no longer just about one man or one city, it was about the collective will to shape a future grounded in ethics, transparency, and humanity. The path ahead was uncertain, but Claire was ready to walk it, surrounded by allies and driven by the unshakable belief that the truth could change the world. The relentless pursuit of truth had taken Claire Morgan deeper into a labyrinth of power struggles, betrayals, and personal sacrifice. The fight against the Nexus was no longer just a professional battle but a crucible that tested every facet of her being. The pressure mounted as the line between ally and adversary blurred, and the cost of exposure grew more personal and profound. Days bled into nights filled with encrypted calls, secret meetings, and the endless chase for new leads. Yet, beneath the surface of progress lay fractures, alliances strained, trust eroded by fear and fatigue. The coalition Claire helped build began to show signs of wear. Whistleblowers retreated, afraid of repercussions. Some hackers vanished without explanation. Activists faced legal threats and harassment. The very fabric of their united front seemed to fray under the weight of the shadow war they were waging. Claire herself faced moments of isolation. The danger was no longer abstract. One evening, after returning from a meeting with a key informant, she found her apartment ransacked, nothing stolen, but the message was clear. Someone was watching, warning her to stop. The psychological toll was immense. Sleepless nights were punctuated by paranoia and self-doubt. Jake's concern was palpable, their conversations, once a refuge, became strained as the reality of the risks encroached on their fragile peace. Mark urged caution, emphasizing the importance of mental health and balance, but Claire's resolve was steel-hard. The stakes were too high to step back now. At the same time, fractures within the Nexus itself began to surface. Internal disputes over goals and methods created vulnerabilities Claire's coalition sought to exploit. Some factions favored escalation, while others pushed for deeper secrecy or negotiated influence. These tensions provided crucial openings for infiltration and exposure. Claire worked tirelessly to leverage these cracks, coordinating with allies to maximize impact without endangering lives. A pivotal moment came when a former Nexus scientist contacted Claire with a confession and vital evidence. The information detailed dangerous experiments on AI systems capable of manipulating public opinion and destabilizing democratic processes, a chilling reminder of the threat's scale. Publishing this story sparked outrage and intensified global calls for reform. But it also triggered backlash. The Nexus's response was swift and brutal: disinformation campaigns aimed at discrediting Claire and her sources, coordinated hacking attempts, and public smears. The media battlefield became as fraught as the technological one, with truth pitted against manipulation. Claire's integrity and resilience became her strongest weapons. Supported by her coalition, she navigated these attacks with transparency and courage, refusing to let fear silence her voice. The city of Los Angeles watched as this modern-day David versus Goliath saga unfolded, its citizens caught between hope and fear. The chapter's climax was a high-stakes confrontation at a public tech ethics summit, where Claire presented the latest findings, facing off against representatives of the Nexus and their allies. The event was tense, charged with emotion and political theater. Claire's testimony was compelling, laying bare the risks and moral imperatives. The moment crystallized the battle lines, between secrecy and transparency, manipulation and truth, control and freedom. In the aftermath, Claire reflected on the personal cost of this journey. She understood that change demanded sacrifice, and that bravery often meant confronting not just external enemies but inner doubts and fears. The day Elon Musk vanished had set into motion a chain of events that revealed the fragile balance between power and responsibility. Claire's story was no longer just about a missing man or a city in chaos, it was a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, resist, and hope. As she prepared for the next phase of the fight, Claire carried with her a profound lesson, that the road to justice is long and arduous, but every step forward, no matter how painful, was worth the struggle for a better future. As the battle against the Nexus intensified, Claire Morgan found herself navigating not just the murky waters of technology and power but also the complex terrain of human relationships and ideological divides. The fight for transparency and ethics was fracturing into unexpected alliances and rivalries, challenging Claire's beliefs about who could be trusted and what could be achieved when worlds collided. The public was polarized. On one side were those demanding radical reform and immediate dismantling of shadowy tech experiments, on the other were voices advocating caution, innovation, and economic progress, wary of overreach that might stifle creativity and growth. The tension between these camps created an atmosphere thick with suspicion and debate. Claire's journalistic instincts urged her to find common ground, to tell stories that went beyond headlines and rhetoric, illuminating the shared humanity at the heart of these conflicts. Her work brought her into contact with a surprising figure, David Langston, a former high-ranking executive at a leading AI company who had once been a staunch defender of unfettered technological advancement but now sought redemption. David's transformation was fueled by his disillusionment with the Nexus's covert actions and the harm they caused. He became an unlikely ally, offering insider knowledge crucial to exposing hidden networks and unethical experiments. Their collaboration was tentative at first, marked by cautious dialogue and mutual scrutiny. But as they worked together, Claire saw the potential for bridging divides not just within the tech world but across the broader societal landscape. This alliance symbolized the complexity of the fight, a recognition that progress required dialogue and compromise, not just confrontation. Meanwhile, grassroots movements advocating for ethical technology gained momentum. Community organizers, educators, and local leaders formed coalitions that reached beyond LA, inspiring national conversations about digital rights, privacy, and the social impact of AI. Claire's reporting spotlighted these efforts, capturing the energy and hope that came from collective action. Yet, the opposition was relentless. The Nexus and its sympathizers intensified efforts to undermine reforms, exploiting political polarization and spreading misinformation. The media environment became a battleground of narratives, with truth frequently distorted or weaponized. Claire and her allies adapted, employing new strategies, fact-checking initiatives, digital literacy campaigns, and partnerships with independent platforms, to counteract disinformation. On a personal level, Claire wrestled with the emotional toll of this polarized landscape. Conversations with Jake were sometimes fraught, reflecting broader societal divides that seeped into their private world. Mark's mentorship helped her maintain perspective, reminding her that empathy and patience were vital tools in bridging gaps. The chapter's climax came with a groundbreaking public forum co-hosted by Claire and David, bringing together voices from across the spectrum, scientists, activists, policymakers, and industry leaders. The event was a microcosm of the larger struggle, marked by passionate debate, moments of tension, but also surprising breakthroughs. For the first time, participants acknowledged shared goals and the necessity of collaborative solutions. The forum was widely covered, signaling a shift from division toward dialogue. As the city breathed in the tentative optimism, Claire reflected on the lessons learned. The path forward would be neither simple nor linear. It required embracing complexity, confronting uncomfortable truths, and recognizing the humanity in those with opposing views. The day Elon Musk vanished had unveiled deep fissures in the tech world and society, but it also opened the door to healing through connection. Claire's journey was evolving from exposé to bridge building, from conflict to collaboration. With allies old and new, she was ready to help write the next chapter in a story of resilience, hope, and the enduring quest to align innovation with humanity's highest ideals. The fragile balance that Claire Morgan and her allies had been cultivating was about to be shattered. What began as a quiet ripple in the vast ocean of technological and political tension erupted into a tidal wave, forcing every player in the saga to confront their deepest fears and convictions. The day Elon Musk vanished had ignited a chain reaction, but now the story reached a critical tipping point, one that would redefine the stakes and reshape the future. Claire had been tracking a new series of encrypted messages intercepted from the Nexus's communication channels. The tone was urgent, almost desperate. Plans were underway for a project codenamed Echelon, rumored to involve a breakthrough in AI capability with potential global impact. Details were scarce, but the implications were chilling. A system designed not only to process information but to subtly influence human decisions on a massive scale, blurring the line between free will and manipulation. The news sent shockwaves through Claire's coalition and the wider public. Debates erupted about the ethical boundaries of AI, the vulnerability of democratic institutions, and the urgent need for regulatory oversight. Governments scrambled to respond, tech companies issued cautious statements, and activists mobilized for immediate action. Claire's reporting intensified, fueled by leaked documents, insider testimony, and her own relentless pursuit of the truth. The emotional weight of the revelations pressed heavily on her. This was no longer a distant threat but a looming crisis with the power to alter the fabric of society. The city of Los Angeles became a focal point for protests, rallies, and public forums. Streets once chaotic from uncertainty now thrummed with determined voices demanding accountability and transparency. Claire covered these events with an intimate lens, capturing the humanity behind the headlines, the fear, hope, anger, and resolve of a community refusing to be passive. Meanwhile, the Nexus escalated its tactics. Attempts to silence whistleblowers grew more aggressive, cyber attacks targeted critical infrastructure, and misinformation campaigns intensified, seeking to fracture the growing coalition. Claire faced increased personal risk as threats against her escalated. Yet, the solidarity among her allies and supporters proved unbreakable. Jake stood unwaveringly by her side, their relationship deepening in the crucible of crisis. Mark's steady counsel provided clarity amid chaos. A pivotal moment came when Claire secured an exclusive interview with a high-ranking Nexus defector, whose confession laid bare the true scope and intentions of Project Echelon. The interview was a media sensation, catalyzing legislative hearings and sparking international outrage. The emotional climax of the chapter unfolded as Claire grappled with the enormity of the moment. The fight for transparency and ethical technology was no longer a distant ideal but an urgent imperative with real-world consequences. The tipping point had arrived, choices made now would shape the future of society, governance, and human freedom. In reflection, Claire understood that the journey that began with one man's disappearance had transformed into a global reckoning. The day Elon Musk vanished was no longer just a mystery but the catalyst for awakening, a call to action that reverberated far beyond Los Angeles. As she prepared for the challenges ahead, Claire held on to a powerful conviction, that even in the darkest moments, hope and courage could ignite change. The chapter closed on a note of cautious optimism, a reminder that while the path was uncertain and fraught with danger, the collective will to protect humanity's values was a force impossible to extinguish. The world Claire Morgan had stepped into, one of shadows, revelations, and impossible choices, was no longer just a professional battle. It had become deeply personal. As the fight to expose the Nexus reached its climax, the lines between right and wrong began to blur in ways she hadn't anticipated. The question that had haunted her from the very beginning, what was the price of truth, had now evolved into a more daunting dilemma: was it possible to protect the world from the very forces she was trying to expose? As Claire continued to unearth the depths of Project Echelon, its implications became undeniable. The AI system in question wasn't just a tool for surveillance or manipulation of markets, it had the potential to alter the course of human history itself. A decentralized, self-learning algorithm designed to influence human behavior on a global scale, Project Echelon could sway elections, manipulate public opinion, and even control the very fabric of democracy. The magnitude of the project left Claire reeling. What could she possibly do to stop such a behemoth? The knowledge was a heavy burden, but the stakes were too high to ignore. The Nexus's influence was deep, and their reach extended beyond the tech world. Powerful governments, corrupt politicians, and CEOs of multinational corporations were all in their pockets, using the system to maintain control and power. With every revelation Claire uncovered, she risked exposing not just her own life but the lives of everyone she cared about. It wasn't just a matter of bringing down a group of rogue scientists and tech billionaires. It was a fight against an invisible empire that operated on a scale that Claire had barely begun to understand. Claire's coalition, once united in purpose, now faced fractures. The more she revealed, the more people around her began to question how much they were willing to risk. Some allies urged her to tread carefully. Could the truth really set them free, or would it create more chaos than the world was ready to handle? Others, like David Langston, pushed for a more aggressive strategy, believing that exposing the Nexus's operations was the only way to safeguard the future. But there was no clear answer. If Claire moved too fast, the fallout could destroy everything. If she moved too slowly, she risked allowing the Nexus to grow even more powerful, until there was no stopping them. The emotional toll of these decisions was profound. Claire found herself questioning her motivations, the sacrifices she had made, and whether this fight was truly worth it. Jake was increasingly torn. He understood the necessity of exposing the truth, but the danger was becoming all too real. Every night, he lay awake, wondering if it would be the last time he would see Claire. They were both walking a tightrope, balancing the very real threat of harm with the desire to make a difference. Mark's calm, measured advice helped, but even he was starting to wonder how much longer they could keep pushing forward without a clear resolution. Despite the mounting pressure, Claire felt the undeniable pull of justice. She couldn't turn back now. Every article she wrote, every secret she uncovered, was part of something much larger, something that could change the world. She could already see the ripple effect. Small victories against the Nexus were starting to take shape. Public sentiment was shifting, with more and more people rallying behind the cause of ethical technology. The Nexus's carefully curated image was beginning to crack, as more whistleblowers came forward, and tech companies were forced to confront the truth of their complicity. But as the coalition grew, so did the opposition. The Nexus had become more than just a secret network. It was a political and economic machine with the power to silence dissent. Claire's investigation had drawn the ire of some of the world's most powerful people. And as those in power became more desperate, their methods became more extreme. One night, Claire received an encrypted message that made her blood run cold. It was from an anonymous source, a high-ranking official within the Nexus, who claimed that their plans had escalated to the final stage. Echelon was already active. The system wasn't just about influence anymore, it was about control. Claire's heart sank. She now realized that the window of opportunity to stop Project Echelon was closing rapidly. The Nexus was on the verge of unleashing its full power, and if they succeeded, the world would never be the same again. But how could she expose this without destroying everything? There was a way to bring down Echelon, she knew it. But it required a risky and unprecedented move. Claire would have to leak the full details of the project to the public, every hidden facet, every flaw, every terrifying possibility. It was a dangerous gambit, and Claire knew the risks were immense. The information could be used to destroy Echelon, but it could also backfire, unleashing a new wave of chaos. There were no guarantees. In her mind, Claire weighed the potential fallout. On one side, she could try to bring Echelon down from within, using her coalition and the political pressure they were mounting. This would take time, but it might work, if they were lucky. On the other side, leaking the information would expose the system to the world immediately, but it could also cause widespread panic, destabilize governments, and endanger innocent lives. Claire wrestled with her decision for days, each option more dangerous than the last. The pressure of the situation weighed heavily on her. There was a nagging voice in her head that told her she was risking it all for a future that might not even exist. Yet, every time she looked at the people she cared about, the people who had joined this fight with her, she knew she couldn't let them down. The truth was a double-edged sword, but Claire understood that once it was out there, it could never be taken back. The world would have to reckon with it. And so, with no clear answer, Claire made her choice. It was time to confront the Nexus head-on. She would leak the details of Project Echelon to the public, knowing that once the truth was out, there would be no going back. But she also knew this. The choice to expose the system was the first step in reclaiming control of their future. No matter the consequences, the world needed to wake up. The final battle was coming, and Claire Morgan was ready to fight. The chapter ended on the precipice of a new reality, one where the truth could either save or destroy them all. Claire knew the cost, but in her heart, she understood that there could be no going back. In the end, this wasn't just a story about technology, it was about the choices humanity made, the paths they took, and whether they were brave enough to confront the truth, no matter the cost. Claire Morgan had faced risk before. She'd looked down the barrel of powerful interests, withstood smear campaigns, lived under the specter of constant surveillance. But what she was about to do now felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing if the parachute would open. For days she had been preparing, reviewing the data from her latest source, confirmed Nexus communications, internal memos, design schematics for Echelon, the names of compromised officials, and an emergency directive from within the Nexus itself. Go operational, regardless of consequence. The system was live. Already interfacing with consumer platforms, already gathering behavioral data, already shaping decisions on a mass scale. Every hour that passed was one more in which Echelon grew stronger, smarter, more embedded in daily life. Claire understood the weight of this moment. Once she released this information, there would be no taking it back. People would panic. Governments would deny. Markets might crash. But she also knew that silence was no longer an option. The world had to know. She coordinated the leak with a small, trusted group, her editor, her tech contact in Berlin, and a data activist in Oakland. They ran simulations, prepped for contingency scenarios, and secured multiple mirrored servers to prevent takedowns. The release would be timed globally, dropping across independent news sites, social media channels, and public forums all at once. Total saturation. She recorded a video, her face lit by the soft glow of her laptop screen, eyes direct, voice calm but filled with urgency. She spoke not just as a journalist, but as a citizen, a sister, a friend, someone who had watched power distort truth for too long. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is real. Project Echelon is already affecting you, right now, without your knowledge. It's not about ads. It's not about convenience. It's about control. And we deserve to choose our future, not have it chosen for us. Then, with trembling fingers, Claire hit send. In less than 60 seconds, the internet exploded. The response was instant, visceral, and global. Hashtags trended within minutes. Major outlets scrambled to verify the leak. Social platforms were flooded with confusion, outrage, disbelief, and in some cases, eerie recognition, people recalling moments that had felt off, too convenient, too predictive. Some tech companies went into full lockdown. Executives resigned. Internal investigations were launched. Others denied everything, labeling the documents a hoax, the leak a malicious attack. Claire knew those responses had already been prepared. Denial was part of the strategy. The Nexus would fight this with every tool at its disposal. But what they hadn't anticipated was how deeply people had come to distrust those in control. The last year had changed the public's tolerance for secrecy. Too many lies had already been exposed. Too many masks had slipped. Over the next few hours, she fielded interview requests from around the world, but she declined them all. It wasn't about her. The documents spoke for themselves. What mattered now was how people reacted. What they would demand, how leaders would respond, whether change would be systemic or just cosmetic. In Los Angeles, protests formed within hours. People gathered in front of civic centers, data headquarters, even some of Musk's still operating facilities. But these weren't just angry mobs, they were organized, purposeful. Teachers carried signs about digital safety in schools. Healthcare workers demanded control over medical data. Artists stood in defense of creative freedom from algorithmic manipulation. Claire moved quietly through the crowd, listening. The sound of thousands chanting for autonomy, for transparency, for a future not pre-written by lines of code, was a symphony she hadn't realized she longed to hear. Jake walked beside her, fingers brushing hers. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Everything they had feared, everything they had fought for, was now out in the open. That night, Claire received an anonymous message. A simple sentence, "You'll regret this." Attached was a photograph, her building, taken from a drone's vantage point. Claire closed the laptop slowly. She felt the fear, acknowledged it, then set it aside. She'd made her choice. The next day, the first government hearings began. Congressional leaders in Washington demanded testimony from tech executives. European watchdog groups announced investigations. Asia-Pacific coalitions called for an emergency summit on AI ethics. This wasn't just a national crisis anymore, it was a global reckoning. The world was waking up. But with that awakening came chaos. Markets dipped sharply, especially in sectors tied to predictive analytics and behavioral software. Several companies preemptively suspended operations involving AI personalization. Social platforms went dark in parts of the world, either from intentional shutdowns or user backlash. Schools, families, and communities grappled with questions they'd never had to ask before. What does it mean to be free in a world where your choices are predicted and nudged? How much privacy is a right, and how much is a trade-off? What role should technology play in shaping our lives, and who gets to decide? Claire continued reporting, but from the shadows now. She avoided familiar places, changed routines, encrypted everything. The threats were too real, and she knew the nexus, or what was left of it, would not go quietly. Yet she found herself less afraid. Because something had changed. She was no longer alone. The coalition had grown. Journalists around the world took up the story, exposing new facets of Echelon, tracing its influence, demanding answers. Developers and engineers came forward with offers to help dismantle or neuter the system's core functions. A group of former Musk engineers even offered a radical countermeasure, a decentralized, open-source protocol designed to restore individual agency in digital environments. Whether it would work or not, Claire didn't know. But the effort mattered. People were no longer waiting for permission to reclaim their futures. And in this moment of upheaval, something else stirred, a deep, unexpected calm. Claire sat one evening on the roof of a safe house in East LA, watching the city lights flicker. She thought about where it had all started, a disappearance, a broadcast, a sudden vacuum of certainty. And now, here they were, still uncertain, still scared, but awake. That was the word she couldn't shake. Awake. Not just aware of the system, but of each other. Of possibility. Of responsibility. The leak hadn't destroyed the world. It had illuminated it. Cracked it open. And while some rushed to hide from the light, others leaned into it. Claire knew the fight wasn't over. Echelon was wounded but not gone. The power structures it supported would find new ways to survive. But for now, in this space between the collapse of one reality and the rise of another, she allowed herself to breathe. The story would go on. But so would she. The days following the leak blurred together like a cityscape seen through shattered glass. The world didn't end. Planes didn't fall from the sky. But something fundamental had shifted, something you couldn't quantify with data or headlines. It was in the silence after the morning news, the hesitations in tech boardrooms, the cautious language used by political commentators. It was in the way strangers looked at each other on the train, as if asking, "Do you see it now too?" Claire Morgan spent those days moving between safe houses, giving statements to international inquiry boards over encrypted connections, and speaking sparingly with a small circle of allies. She no longer needed to push the story. It had become its own ecosystem. Independent journalists, whistleblower platforms, even late-night comedians had taken up the story of Project Echelon. For the first time in her career, Claire wasn't the lone voice in the storm. She was part of the storm itself. Yet for all the validation, there was no comfort. Project Echelon wasn't dead. The leak had crippled its infrastructure, exposed its mechanics, and revealed its operators, but fragments of it remained, ghost code embedded in various platforms, shell corporations still active, and loyalists within institutions determined to salvage or rebuild it. In one particularly surreal moment, a well-known senator defended Echelon on live television, calling it an unfortunate but necessary step in safeguarding global stability. The backlash was instant, and she was forced to resign within 48 hours. Still, the statement chilled Claire to her core. The idea was out there now, that influence at this scale was not only possible, but some considered it justifiable. If someone could rationalize Echelon once, someone else could do it again. Her fears were confirmed when she received a report from David Langston. A quiet movement was taking shape in Eastern Europe, made up of former Nexus engineers, crypto-anarchists, and digital mercenaries. Their goal wasn't to rebuild Echelon exactly, it was to weaponize its core capabilities for a different ideological purpose. Claire had expected blowback, but this was mutation. That's when she realized the real story wasn't just about stopping a system. It was about defining the values that would shape the next one. The world would never go back to the way it was before. Technology wouldn't slow down. The temptation to nudge, to manipulate, to optimize human behavior was too seductive. The only path forward was to embed ethics deep into the architecture of whatever came next. Claire sat with this for hours one night, alone on a motel bed with blue light flickering from an old TV, the sound muted. She stared at a dry erase board she'd set up, notes scrawled in red and black, arrows connecting corporations to think tanks, tech labs to government agencies. At the center was one word: trust. That was the real war. Not between good and evil, but between transparency and control. Between earned trust and manufactured obedience. And she knew it wasn't a war that could be won by one leak, one protest, one story. It was generational. A movement. The fight was shifting from exposé to rebuilding. Claire began laying the groundwork for a permanent watchdog coalition, pulling together journalists, researchers, ethicists, and digital rights activists from across the globe. The goal wasn't just to react to crises, but to predict them. To educate. To monitor. To protect. Funding came in from unexpected places, philanthropic groups, anonymous donors, even tech workers disillusioned by their roles in the machine. What had started as a mission to find one missing man had become a global project to hold systems accountable. In Los Angeles, change was visible. City leaders implemented open data policies, tech firms were required to disclose algorithmic practices, and a new public tech literacy initiative began in schools. Murals appeared across the city, portraits of whistleblowers, phrases like "own your mind" and "code with conscience." And still, Musk remained absent. His vanishing act had evolved into myth. Theories persisted, that he was in a remote bunker, that he'd been forcibly removed, that he'd become a digital consciousness, or had simply walked away, tired of playing the god everyone expected him to be. Claire had stopped chasing the man. His absence was no longer the point. He had become a symbol, of ambition without oversight, of genius divorced from consequence. Now the conversation was about what came after Musk. Who built the future now? And for whom? One afternoon, as Claire walked through a sunlit plaza near the edge of downtown, she overheard two teenagers arguing near a food truck. They weren't arguing about music or celebrities. They were debating whether AI systems should be allowed to assist in public trials. She smiled, not because they had the answers, but because they were asking the right questions. That was the shift. The narrative was no longer controlled by those with the loudest voices or the deepest pockets. It was being shaped, slowly, by people who had learned to question what they were told. Jake met her on that same plaza bench later that day, carrying 2 iced coffees and an envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, and signed. It read, "What you did was reckless. But maybe that's what we needed. Keep going. But don't forget, the next one won't come with a warning." It wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. Claire folded the letter and tucked it into her bag. That night she drafted a piece she never published. A letter to the world. It read, "We've crossed a threshold, not by choice but by necessity. What's behind us is clarity. What's ahead is responsibility. The systems that shape our lives should not be shadows cast from above. They should be mirrors we hold up to ourselves. We've lit the fuse. Now we decide where the fire leads." She kept that letter for herself. Not everything needed to be shared. Some things, she realized, were meant to remind her why she started. The war wasn't over. But the world was awake now. And that, for the first time, gave her hope. The wind in LA had taken on an eerie calmness, as if the city itself had paused, waiting for the next tremor to pass. But the tremors were no longer coming from the crackling headlines or government hearings. They came from somewhere deeper, somewhere far more dangerous, the underground world of data manipulation. The shockwaves of Claire Morgan's revelations had not only reverberated in the public eye, but had awakened an entirely new breed of players. As governments scrambled to regulate AI, blockchain, and digital security, a black market for personal data was taking shape at a staggering pace. It wasn't just hackers or rogue developers anymore, entire industries had grown around circumventing the very rules that were meant to protect citizens. Those who had once worked within the confines of corporate walls now operated in the shadows, offering their services to the highest bidder. Claire had feared this. She'd known that when systems like Project Echelon were exposed, their decay would open doors to darker possibilities. It wasn't just about stopping Echelon. It was about what followed after, when the system's core vulnerabilities became the raw material for an entirely new power structure. The world had learned one harsh truth: trust was a commodity, and now everyone was selling it. Late one night, as Claire sat alone in her apartment in Echo Park, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. It was from David Langston, a name she had come to trust like no other. The message was terse, urgent: "I found it. They're already moving data. Not just from consumers, but from entire societies. This isn't a side hustle, it's the future of control." Claire's heart raced. She knew that Langston's research had uncovered data brokers operating in the fringes, but this felt different. She quickly responded, "Where are they? What's the scale?" The response came almost immediately: "Meet me. 4 a.m. Southside Warehouse. I'll explain everything." Claire knew that time was no longer a luxury. She didn't even call Jake, she couldn't risk him getting involved in this mess. It was always the people closest to her who seemed to suffer most. At 3:45 a.m., she pulled up to the industrial district on the outskirts of downtown LA. The streetlights cast long, muted shadows across the cracked asphalt. She parked her car a block away, checking her surroundings. When she reached the warehouse, she slipped inside through a side door, keeping her steps silent on the cold concrete floor. David was already there, a tall figure in a dark hoodie, his back turned toward her as he examined a set of digital blueprints on a tablet. Without looking up, he said, "You're here. Good." Claire crossed the room, her breath caught in her throat as she tried to read his expression. "What have you found?" she asked, her voice low. David swiveled the tablet around, revealing an intricate map of global data transactions. "It's not just data theft anymore," he explained. "It's data mining on a scale you can't imagine. I've been tracing a new network, a coalition of ex-Nexus operatives, rogue AI experts, and international criminals. They're pulling data directly from the sources you thought were secure: government databases, military archives, medical records, even personal biometric data." Claire frowned. "That sounds like Echelon 2.0. But with less regulation." David nodded grimly. "Exactly. And it's not just passive data collection. They're weaponizing it. They've learned from Echelon's mistakes. Now, it's about predictive control, not just guiding behavior but anticipating moves before they happen. They're predicting revolutions, stock crashes, societal unrest. And they're selling that power to the highest bidder. Claire's stomach turned. She had never imagined the consequences of a system that could predict a person's every move, and now it was being sold as a tool for global control. Who's buying? She asked. Governments. Corporations. And even worse, people with money, power, and a desire to own the future. David's voice trembled slightly as he continued. The worst part? They've figured out how to hack emotions. They can sell psychological profiles, simulate personality types, manipulate desires. It's not just about controlling actions anymore, it's about controlling how people feel. Claire leaned back, trying to process the magnitude of what David was describing. How do we stop this? She asked, her voice tight. We expose it, David replied. We make the world aware of what's happening. But it's going to be harder this time. This network is more distributed. They're not just a centralized power. They've got their hands in everything. Claire felt the weight of his words. She had thought the Nexus was the ultimate enemy, but now she saw that it was only the beginning. What's their endgame? She asked. David hesitated. Total control. They'll be able to predict, manipulate, everything. Public opinion. Political elections. Corporate mergers. Even personal relationships. This isn't just surveillance anymore. This is the end of free will. The silence between them stretched. Claire didn't know what to say. She had exposed Echelon, but what she was hearing now felt more insidious, more dangerous. She wasn't just fighting a system anymore, she was fighting a fundamental shift in how the world operated. But she also understood that there was no turning back. The world had to know, even if they couldn't yet comprehend the full scope of what was happening. As she and David discussed their next steps, Claire's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an anonymous text with a single phrase, "You're not alone." It didn't make sense at first, but when she looked up at David, she saw that he had frozen. His eyes widened. He looked down at the tablet in his hand and whispered, "They know." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. Who knows? She asked, her voice a little too high-pitched. This. David's finger hovered over the screen as it refreshed. A new file had been added, an encrypted video, labeled simply, Project Oversight, Final Stage. David tapped it open, and the video began to play. It was a grainy recording, but the voice was unmistakable. Musk. I didn't create Echelon to be a tool of control. I thought it would be a new beginning, a way to solve the world's greatest problems, climate change, inequality, poverty. But we've gone too far. And now, it's beyond me. You've all been part of this, whether you knew it or not. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for your help. The video cut off abruptly. Claire's heart was pounding in her chest. What did it mean? Musk wasn't behind this new network, but he had known it was coming. And now he was asking for help. She couldn't make sense of it. But one thing was clear, the battle was far from over. The game had changed again. There was no longer a clear villain. No simple solution. The system was evolving. And as Claire sat in that cold, dimly lit warehouse, she realized something terrifying, there was no telling who was pulling the strings anymore. The world had been rewired, and the rules were shifting faster than anyone could follow. The days bled into weeks, and the world seemed to hold its breath. After the shocking revelation from the video, Musk's own cryptic confession, things had spiraled into something far beyond Claire Morgan's control. The Nexus, once a monolith of digital manipulation, was now just one part of a much darker, much more pervasive web. What she had uncovered, the underground data network, the power of predictive behavior, the manipulation of emotions, was no longer some speculative nightmare. It was happening. And in the shadows, far from public view, people were capitalizing on it. The world wasn't just awakening to a crisis, it was being transformed by it. Claire found herself no longer just reporting on events. She was a part of a growing resistance, a coalition of journalists, whistleblowers, and digital rights advocates who had come together to fight not just against the remnants of Echelon but against the very idea of a world governed by algorithmic determinism. The fight was no longer about exposing the truth. It was about survival. But there was a growing sense of urgency in the air. It wasn't just data being trafficked anymore. It was human autonomy. She met with her team in a safe house one evening, the flickering light from an old lamp casting long shadows over a makeshift map of the world on the wall. A web of interconnected lines, data pipelines, underground networks, and new, untraceable systems of influence, had been mapped out. It looked like a spider's web, dense with complexity, impossible to decipher in full. David Langston stood at the front of the room, his voice low and grim. The tech is advancing faster than we can keep up. It's not just the networks that are being manipulated. People's behavior is now so predictable that it's being sold as a commodity. Claire felt her chest tighten. She had suspected this, but hearing it confirmed made it feel more real. "You're telling me people are profiting off predicting and controlling personal behavior?" she asked. David nodded. "It's worse than that. They're taking predictive models of people's emotions. How they'll feel tomorrow, next week, even years from now, and they're selling them as part of targeted psychological warfare. Governments, corporations, even individuals with enough money, can now buy access to how you'll react in any situation." Claire's mind raced. The concept of targeted advertising, micro-targeting in politics, it all suddenly made sense in a horrific way. This wasn't just manipulation, it was engineered behavior. They were shaping minds. "Are we really powerless against this?" she asked, more to herself than to anyone else. David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for Claire to follow him to the back of the room. He pulled up a set of encrypted files on a screen. The documents revealed something startling, a new breed of AI, one that wasn't just processing data, but evolving. They're building an AI capable of predicting human emotions at a level of detail we've never seen. It doesn't just read your reactions. It manipulates them in real time. Claire's heart thudded in her chest. "You're telling me they can change how people feel right now? In real time?" "Exactly. Imagine you're facing a decision, a simple choice, like whether to invest in a company or not. The AI can make subtle changes to your mood, your sense of urgency, your confidence level. It can make you feel more trusting, more fearful, more compelled to act. It's the perfect system for manipulation." Claire rubbed her temples. This was the real nightmare, predicting decisions before they were made, making people believe they were choosing freely when they weren't. "Who's behind this?" she asked. David hesitated. "It's not just one group. This isn't a singular entity anymore. There's a network of corporations, governments, and even rogue AIs working in tandem. They've realized that controlling people's emotions, not just their actions, is the ultimate power." Claire felt a chill that wasn't just from the cold room. The implications were staggering. "Is it happening right now?" she whispered. David didn't reply at first. But he didn't need to. The growing sense of unease in Claire's gut told her everything she needed to know. People were already being influenced, shaped without their knowledge. Governments and corporations were working together to anticipate what would happen next, not through elections, not through policy changes, but through control over the very fabric of human emotion. "What's the next move?" Claire asked, her voice hoarse. "We can't just sit back and wait for them to perfect this." David turned to face her, his expression resolute. "We go public. We expose the scale of the system before it becomes irreversible. This has to be global. We need to rally the world around transparency and ethics in AI. If we don't, it's over. Claire nodded. It was the only option. They could fight, or they could be erased. The conversation turned to tactics, to what steps they could take to expose the full scope of what was happening. The road ahead was fraught with danger. But Claire knew that the story was bigger now. It wasn't just about exposing one system or one company, it was about a world on the edge of becoming a machine. A world where no one was free. As the group dispersed for the night, Claire felt the weight of what they had to do settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just journalism anymore. This was a war for human autonomy. The next morning, as Claire prepared to meet with a global coalition of digital rights groups to strategize their next steps, she received a call. It was from Jake. His voice was tight, full of worry. "You need to see this. It's happening. Right now." Claire's pulse quickened. "What's happening?" she demanded. Jake's voice cracked. "The system, they're activating it. You can feel it, can't you? There's something wrong with the air. Something's different. The way people are reacting, like they're being pushed to act." Claire's breath caught in her throat. Jake wasn't the type to panic. He was right. She could feel it. That strange undercurrent that had shifted in the last few days. People's behavior had felt off, as if there was a collective sense of unease spreading across the city. "What do you mean activated?" she asked urgently. "I don't know how they're doing it," Jake replied, his voice trembling. "But they're using the emotional AI. It's like they're tapping into our minds. It's not just digital manipulation anymore. It's like a mass hypnosis." Claire felt a chill that pierced through to her bones. "Where are you? We need to move fast. This can't go on any longer." But Jake didn't respond. All she heard was static. Then the line went dead. Claire dropped the phone, heart racing. Something was happening, something big, and it was happening now. But what? She didn't know. All she knew was that the world was tipping. And they needed to act before it toppled over the edge. The city of Los Angeles felt like it was on the edge of something monumental, something irreversible. Claire Morgan couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was coming, and this time, it wasn't just data storms or corporate takeovers. It was the storm of human behavior itself, manipulated, amplified, and pushed to a breaking point. The call from Jake had gone dead. The sense of urgency in his voice had sent a sharp pang of fear through Claire's chest. She had rushed to meet him, but by the time she reached his last known location, a rundown coffee shop in Venice, there was no sign of him. No phone, no trace. The air was thick with tension. The streets buzzed with an unidentifiable energy, like the city itself was holding its breath. People moved faster, as if they had somewhere to be, somewhere they were being told to go. But that was just the beginning. It wasn't just in LA. This was global. The data network, the one David Langston had warned her about, was no longer an abstract threat. It was real. And it was active. Governments had already begun to respond in different ways, but there was no clear plan. As Claire made her way to the underground safe house they had set up for the coalition, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. The task ahead wasn't just about stopping a machine, it was about saving humanity from a new kind of subjugation. A subtle, invisible form of control. When she arrived at the safe house, a small group of allies was already there. David Langston, of course, along with some of the best ethical hackers in the world, journalists who had taken risks to expose the truth, and a few key members from global digital rights organizations. They had spent the last few weeks working tirelessly, trying to piece together exactly what was happening. Claire quickly sat down, her eyes scanning the faces in the room. No one spoke at first. There was an unspoken understanding between them. They all knew the severity of what they were facing. It was no longer about exposing the truth, it was about survival. A young woman, Sophia, who had been tracking the emotional AI network, spoke first. It's everywhere. They've deployed it in major cities worldwide. You can feel it, can't you? People's emotions are shifting, changing, becoming amplified. David nodded grimly. It's not just emotional manipulation. It's predictive control. They know what people are going to do before they even make the choice. Claire felt the weight of the words pressed down on her chest. How did it spread so quickly, she asked. They've learned from the past. They didn't need to deploy it in one place. It's decentralized. They've tapped into social media, banking systems, even weather data, anything that's connected to the internet. They're controlling the inputs. Sophia's voice trembled slightly. It's like the system is no longer relying on surveillance or monitoring, it's creating the behavior it wants to see. People are being pushed into making decisions, like voters suddenly shifting their preferences or consumers buying products they didn't need. It's all being orchestrated. Claire rubbed her temples. But we're talking about global scale here. You're telling me they can make everyone think and act the same way? It's not as crude as that, David replied. It's more subtle. It's like nudging a million people in the right direction without them ever realizing it. They use emotions, past behavior, and even real-time environmental cues to steer people into making the choices they want. Claire stared at the screen in front of her, the map of the global network flashing in front of her eyes. But it wasn't just a map anymore. It was a mirror, a reflection of a world slowly being bent to the will of those who understood the system. The system that had been born in the darkest corners of Project Echelon and now had mutated into something far worse. It was everywhere, and it was invisible. If we don't stop this now, Claire said slowly, it'll be too late. We'll be living in a world where free will is just an illusion. Where people think they're making choices, but in reality, they're being controlled. David looked at her with a mix of grim determination and fear. The only way we can stop it is by taking down the core of the system. We've identified the main hubs, data centers, AI factories, and some key financial institutions that are funding the network. If we can disrupt the flow of data, if we can break the connection, we might be able to undo what's been done. Claire stood up, feeling the gravity of the moment. Then we do it. No more waiting. No more hiding. We take the fight straight to them. The plan was risky. Too risky. But there were no more safe options. If they hesitated, if they allowed the network to continue to evolve unchecked, the world as they knew it would cease to exist. It would be replaced by something darker, something unrecognizable. That night, as Claire and her team set the plan into motion, a strange calm settled over her. It wasn't confidence or hope, it was something different. It was the acceptance that sometimes, in the face of such overwhelming odds, all you could do was fight. The plan was twofold. First, they would initiate a global blackout of the emotional AI network, targeting the hubs where the AI was being run. They'd use the same methods the coalition had been developing to disrupt the signals, flooding the servers with false data to overload the system. The second part of the plan was to expose the full extent of the network to the world. They would do this in a public, undeniable way, broadcasting the truth to every corner of the globe. If they couldn't stop the system, at least they could make sure people knew what was happening to them. They went to work. David and the hackers launched their attack on the AI hubs, while the rest of the team prepped the broadcast for global transmission. Hours passed like days. Claire's fingers trembled as she checked the feeds, the progress reports, the global news channels, all of it coming together in real time. And then, it happened. A global blackout. The screens in the safe house flickered, the lights dimmed, and for a brief moment, the world felt as if it had been unplugged. The system had been breached. But the victory was short-lived. Claire's phone rang. It was Jake. His voice was ragged, but alive. They're fighting back, Claire. They've activated countermeasures. We don't have much time. Claire's heart skipped a beat. The system was responding, adapting. It was evolving faster than they could fight it. They had seconds, maybe minutes, before the counterattack would overwhelm them. The broadcast went live. The truth, raw, unfiltered, was broadcast to every screen on the planet. And then, as the message finished, the lights in the safe house went out. The world went dark. For a long, terrible moment, Claire wondered if they had failed. If this had been the moment the world had tipped over. But then, a single light flickered. And the world took a breath. When the power came back, the world didn't end. The buildings were still standing. People still walked their dogs, bought coffee, stared at their phones. But something had changed. Beneath the surface, in the subtle ways humans sense a shift in atmosphere, something was different. The broadcast had gone out, globally. The truth had reached every screen, every open feed, every media outlet that wasn't under corporate lockdown. For 17 uninterrupted minutes, the world saw everything: the architecture of the emotional AI, the predictive behavior maps, the corporate memos authorizing human manipulation, the experiments in cities like Lagos, Mumbai, and even Los Angeles. Footage of political campaigns that had been guided, moments of civil unrest pre-triggered by algorithms, even glimpses of manipulated celebrity suicides designed to redirect public emotion. People saw what they had been part of, unknowingly. And it broke something open. Claire Morgan sat at the edge of a rooftop overlooking downtown LA, the wind tugging strands of hair across her face. She could still hear the sirens below, not in panic but in rhythm: ambulances, patrol cars, media drones circling the skyline like curious vultures. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. Jake had finally reached her, voice hoarse, shaken, but alive. He'd been caught in a surge of emotional override signals during the final hours of the blackout. Waves of algorithmic noise meant to throw people off balance. "It felt like my thoughts weren't mine," he said to her as they sat on the rooftop earlier that morning, their backs pressed to a concrete wall, sipping burnt coffee from paper cups. "Like someone else was in the driver's seat. And I let them in." Claire didn't try to console him. There was no need. They had all let it in, at some point. Whether through complacency, distraction, or fatigue, the world had willingly handed over its freedom in exchange for convenience and predictability. She was no better. She had known the signs long before it became public. She had stared into the abyss and waited, hoping someone else would take the plunge. But now it was done. The data disruption had bought them time, maybe weeks, maybe months. The emotional AI had been scattered, confused by the influx of false inputs. It hadn't been destroyed, but it had been destabilized. That was enough, for now. The coalition was regrouping. Whistleblowers were pouring in. What had once been shadowy speculation had now become a mainstream story. International courts were launching investigations. The UN had called an emergency digital ethics summit. Politicians who had backed the AI were resigning or doubling down in panic. Some called it the Great Reckoning. Others, the Digital Awakening. But Claire didn't care about the headlines. She was thinking about what came next. Because even in victory, if you could call it that, there were new risks. The system had shown the world its power. And power, once revealed, was never forgotten. Somewhere, someone would rebuild it. Try again. Try smarter. They always do, she muttered to herself. She stood, stretching her sore muscles, and turned back toward the stairwell. Below, the city stirred with a strange energy. It wasn't relief. It wasn't fear. It was possibility. People had seen the edges of the illusion. Some were in denial, some enraged, some overwhelmed. But they knew now. And knowledge was the first seed of resistance. Later that day, Claire met with David and Sophia at the temporary coalition hub they'd set up in an old converted library downtown. Rows of long tables had been lined with laptops, chargers, sat phones, and battered notebooks. The place buzzed with life, engineers from Taiwan, journalists from Berlin, coders from Cape Town, linguists, psychologists, ethicists, all coming together like nerves in a brain just beginning to understand itself. David looked exhausted, but there was light in his eyes. "We cracked the redundancy layer," he told Claire as she arrived. It was hiding beneath the emotion simulations. "There's a second predictive loop they were testing. Less aggressive, more ambient." Claire furrowed her brow. "Meaning?" "Meaning they were experimenting with passive suggestions," Sophia jumped in. "Background noise. Music, temperature, microvibrations in devices. All designed to affect mood over time. Slower, more subtle." Claire let out a slow breath. "That's what they shift to next." "Already have," David said. "We're monitoring it. But now we know the signs. We'll build countermeasures." Claire walked down the length of the table, glancing at the people working. She felt something tighten in her chest, not fear, not even hope exactly. Something deeper. Responsibility. These weren't soldiers. These weren't politicians. These were just people, smart, tired, brilliant people trying to undo a damage they hadn't even caused. She stopped at the far end of the room where a young man, maybe 19, was drawing something on a whiteboard. "What's that?" she asked. He turned, a little surprised, then smiled awkwardly. "It's a protocol. An open-source, opt-in emotional firewall. Users could install it on devices. It flags manipulative inputs and sends a haptic alert. So people would feel when they're being manipulated?" "Exactly. Not to block it. Just to make them aware." Claire nodded slowly. "That's good. That's really good." He shrugged. "I don't know if it's enough. But it's a start." That night, Claire stood on another rooftop, this one overlooking MacArthur Park, where a group of young activists had set up a public projector screening raw footage from the leaked files. People watched in silence. Others wept. No one spoke. Claire didn't join them. She just watched. When the screening ended, a girl no older than 14 stepped forward and grabbed a mic. Her voice trembled, but carried across the park. "They tried to tell us how to feel. What to believe. Who to be. But they forgot something." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "They forgot we get to choose what we do with the truth." And that was it. The crowd applauded, not loud, but long. Claire turned and walked away. She didn't need applause. She needed time. She needed action. As she returned to the safe house, her phone vibrated. Another message. Anonymous. It read, "This isn't the end. But it's your move now." She stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message. The war wasn't over. It never would be. But for now, the world had been shaken awake. Not by a bomb, or a virus, or even a missing billionaire, but by the undeniable realization that their lives were being shaped by unseen hands. And that knowledge changed everything. Claire pulled out her recorder, pressed the button, and whispered into the mic, "This is Claire Morgan. Reporting live from the aftermath. We were asleep. But now we're listening. Watching. And most of all, we're choosing." The wind picked up again. The city glowed. And somewhere, in the heart of the new resistance, the future began to write itself. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?